live on Facebook, well, with Restream through Facebook, through Alberta Landlords Watch. And joining me today are Gil Donkersgood from BC, and our special guest is Sherilynn Milsom from Edmonton. And what I do, the reason I do these shows is because I like to share different investors, different ways of investing with landlords. And I would also like to share my tips on landlording with real estate investors, because I really don't want you to step in the landmines that I've stepped in, which can be financially harsh and legally very harsh as well. So if I can help you bypass those things and go through the green lights, that's what I'm going to do. And that's why I do this show. So tonight's topic is all about how to buy properties with zero down and no mortgage using seller financing. And Sherry really walks her talk. She is a professional investor since 2006, when she exhausted her capital, and then she started turning to creative investing strategies. And then she started teaching creative investment strategies since 2010. And she hasn't actually applied for a mortgage since 2016. So she's bought multiple properties with almost zero down payment. She's walked her talk. She's done this before, and she's going to be telling us how she's going to do this, and she's going to be sharing a little bit of information about her upcoming class, which you can get a link to. I'll post a link in the YouTube video so that you can not miss it. So, Sherilynn, this sounds too good to be true. This sounds like one of those fake ads that they used to have on TV, where they'd say, put nothing down, get nothing in return, and cost you nothing. So tell me, if this isn't too good to be true, then how does this actually work?
Well, first and foremost, this is not get rich quick. And that's what a lot of those fake ads and fake gurus were promoting those years ago. Well, actually, they still do, really. But is the whole get rich quick and buy with no money down and get rich quick. No, it doesn't matter what you do in real estate. If you do it legally, you're not going to get rich quick. So this isn't about that.
Okay, go ahead, get off the show. We want to deal with illegal stuff and get rich quick.
But yes, you absolutely can legally buy properties with zero money or little to no money down, is what I like to say, because I've bought a lot of properties with no money down, and then some of them have had a little bit of money down. But often when I'm buying properties using seller financing, even if there's a bunch of equity that the seller has in the property that they normally would get that cash right away if they sell the conventional way, they wait for it. They're willing to wait for it, so they don't get their big lump of cash until I eventually sell or refinance myself. And actually, I realized the other day, it's just a tiny bit inaccurate to say I haven't applied for a mortgage since 2016, because we did refinance one of these seller financed purchases where we bought it with no money down and no mortgage application. And then years later, we refinanced it. And because we had so much mortgage pay down over those years, when we refinanced it, we still put nothing down on the property. So it kind of almost doesn't count as getting a mortgage because we still had nothing down. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm sorry. This excites me so much to talk about this with people. So the bottom line is,
let's just back up though.
Yeah.
Okay, let's say I've taken actually two, well, one rent to own, and then the other one was not called rent to own because she didn't want to do rent to own. It was owner financing. So I've taken two courses in this, one with the Real Estate Investment Network, and then one with this other lady who's bought $21 million in properties without any of her own money and has done extremely well. And so if I was hearing this for the first time, I'd be like, what do you do? So what's the first step? What's the second step? What's the third step?
Yeah, sorry, I do get ahead of myself. I get too excited. So what it is in a nutshell is instead of going to a bank and getting a mortgage and putting 20 or 25% down, we work out the financing directly with the seller. So sometimes, actually often, they have an underlying mortgage, so that gets kind of built into it. Then they also might have a whole bunch of equity, or maybe they have only a little bit of equity in the property. It doesn't really matter. But whatever equity they have, we make arrangements for how and when that's going to be paid off too. And like I said, sometimes it's not till 5 years from now when we either sell or refinance the property. So we are buying the property. We don't have to qualify for a mortgage. It's usually little to no money down. We're arranging financing directly with the seller. So we deal with any mortgage, underlying mortgage, any equity, that all gets decided between us and the seller, and no bank is involved other than any underlying financing he may have. But we don't have to deal with them. So other than switching the payments into our names, that's the only thing we have to deal with. So it's really great system that helps out. I mean, it helps us out because we get to buy properties without having to get a mortgage. And often, as with many investors, you hit that mortgage wall, you can't buy any more properties with a new mortgage. You're done until you switch into, commercial or something. So that mortgage wall is a big barrier for investors. But then when it comes to the sellers trying to sell their properties, there are loads of reasons why a seller might want or need to sell this way. So, for example, I got a call yesterday from a seller who their mortgage is coming up for renewal April 1st. And they realized, oh my goodness, the interest rates have quadrupled since when we bought this property. We actually don't have a whole lot of equity in it. Our payments are going to be huge. So they don't want to renew, they don't want to be responsible for those payments. So we could still work with the existing financing. They're willing to renew it. They just don't want to have to pay it. So these are people who, they can't handle these payments anymore. And often it's people who are getting divorced, or people who just don't want to deal with realtors, or they're moving out of province, or whatever the case may be, where they just need it gone. And oh my gosh, we hear that so often. They just need it gone. So the cool thing is we get to buy these properties with no mortgage qualification and with little to no money down, and we're helping people out of a bind at the same time.
Right.
So I really like it.
And what you do is you buy the property with no money down, but you rent it to a tenant buyer. Is that what you do? So someone who is
That's my
who wants to live in the
first.
property?
Yeah, that's my first choice is to do a rent to own on that property, because eventually, when you're working with seller financing, eventually you need to cash out the seller somehow. They need to get off mortgage and title eventually. So sometimes it's 2 years, sometimes it's 8 years, and anything in between. So what we like to do, for instance, let's say it's a 3-year term that we have arranged with the seller. And then, because that's what their mortgage is, and that helps them avoid penalties, prepayment penalties. So we match our original term with whatever underlying mortgage they might have. So now we've got a 3-year term with the possibility of renewal, of course. And now I'm going to try to find a tenant buyer who's going to be able to buy within the 3 years. And that way, we've already got a plan for cashing out the seller within the term, and everybody's happy. And we've not only helped somebody get rid of their house, but we've also helped another family buy a house. So
who probably might not qualify for a mortgage on their own, or not for quite some time. So who are those people who wouldn't qualify for a mortgage?
Oh, COVID kicked a lot of people's butts. There are so many people out there who have that reduced income for a while. And of course, if you're not on salary, then when you go to qualify for a bank mortgage, they take your last 2 years tax returns. Well, if those last 2 years tax returns are artificially low, they're lower than they normally would be, well, now they're kind of stuck behind an 8 ball. And so this gives them the chance to, now that everything's getting back to the new normal, we'll say, now they can have the better tax returns, show higher verifiable income, and qualify for that mortgage in a couple of years. So that's one example of somebody who might not be able to get the mortgage they really want right now, and that they would normally be able to get. And then in a couple of years they can.
They probably can, yeah. Or maybe, what about newcomers to Canada who might have the cash, but they don't have any credit yet?
Oh yeah, big time. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and sometimes it's no, when we're looking for a tenant buyer, we're looking for people who are almost there. They're almost ready to buy a house. We're not aiming for people with terrible credit. So let's just get that out of the way. But yeah, so they're and because we want to set everybody up for success. We want that seller to be cashed out ideally within that first term that we've set up for the seller financing. So yeah, we definitely want to find a good prospect for somebody to, but it doesn't have to be a rent to own tenant. We also will take these and do just a regular rental. And that's that one that I did refinance. We had that just as a regular rental for a few years.
Mhm.
And the mortgage paid on was huge. Like I'm talking huge, $17,000 a year was the mortgage pay down, because the seller left over $100,000 of equity in the property. So we had the benefit of extra mortgage pay down because of that money left in the property. And in return, we paid them a higher price. So they got a benefit from doing this too. We always want to set up a win-win. That's the big key to doing this, is that everybody wins. Otherwise, why would anyone want to do it?
Yeah, exactly. Otherwise, people would just want to wait until they could afford it. But it's nice that they don't have to wait, that they could afford to buy a property that they want to live in now, and then to get their lives in order, get their credit in order, and then, decide what they want to do, either pay it off or go through a bank to get the financing, or refinance through the owner, or through you, I mean.
Yeah. Well, and when we're selling through, or sorry, when we're buying with seller financing, then those sellers sometimes they, well, like I said, often they just need out, or they just want it gone. Sometimes, like in the case with these people who left all that money in, they had already bought their next house. They already had a mortgage on it, so they didn't need to get rid of this mortgage. But they also didn't want to be paying 2 mortgage payments. So that was the big thing for them, is we've already got this, our possession is in 2 months. We can't wait around for a realtor to sell this house. We want it gone now. We want to have that security. We don't want the stress of waiting to see if a realtor can sell it. So they sold it to us. And like I say, they didn't need the equity. They didn't right away. I mean, they wanted it eventually, of course, but they didn't need it right away. They didn't need any cash right now. They didn't need to have that mortgage out of their names. They already had their new mortgage. So they were perfect people for this, because they just needed it done. They needed a set time of when they would be able to not be paying this mortgage anymore and not have to make 2 payments. Right. So it's basically, I see us as solution providers. You find what that seller really needs, and then you do your best to provide that solution, whether it's a closing date at a specific time, whether it's a little bit of money now, whether it's just get this monkey off my back. I don't want this debt anymore. This is too stressful. People going through divorce, that's a big one, because now all of a sudden you had this family home with this big mortgage payment. Now one spouse has moved out. You've got 2 households now on the same amount of income, and it gets to be too much. And people realize, we can't do this. We don't want to end up with bad credit. We don't want to end up with foreclosure. We just need it gone. Like I said, we hear that so often. We just need it gone.
Yeah. Okay. That's really good. So how do you find the buyers? How do you find the people who are willing to sell your house? Sorry, sellers. I'm getting my words mixed up. How do you find the sellers, and how do you find the tenant buyers?
Well, for the sellers who want to sell to us with seller financing, we like it when they come to us. So we have Facebook pages of We Buy Houses. We have website, so people can. I mean, we have a professional website, so that when people Google how do I sell my house quickly, they will find us right away. So there's I think last time I checked, we're on page 1 for that. So I mean, that's the ideal thing, because that's what people are doing. They're getting on Google and they're saying, I need to sell my house fast. How do I sell my house quickly? And then we pop up and they give us a call. So and you can do it through, there's all kinds of ways you can do it. You probably, in any major city, you probably will see the We Buy Houses signs posted on telephone poles and everything. Pardon me?
Gil hates those.
I do too. I have never done one,
makes
and I
the whole
never
industry look cheesy. It makes everybody look unprofessional.
Oh my goodness!
Buyers in my mailbox will buy your house in any condition. And then I've also been. I have to mention this because this comes up all the time. I go on these different real estate shows, not just shows, but webinars where people talk about how they can sort of cash out or acquire properties for next to nothing. And a lot of the American webinars are on. You find people who are going bankrupt, and you take their equity, and then you kick them out, and they live on the street. And I thought, how can these people live with themselves? Like, it just it's revolting. And they're all frothing at the mouth talking about how they got this. I think I remember asking one at one time, so what happens to the person that you got their house, you got their equity, they're already like whatever, divorced, they had a death in their family, they're sick, because in the United States, if your health insurance doesn't cover your illness, you go bankrupt while you're in the hospital. And so now you don't have a house, you don't have a place to live, you're sick. How the hell are you ever going to get off the street? Like, I don't know how these people could live with themselves. So those programs are just like click.
I can tell you the Canadian version of that. So one of the people that we helped out, her husband died, and obviously they did not have any life insurance. They were seniors, so I think that when you hit a certain point, life insurance is too expensive, so people just let it go. Except if you don't have your house paid off, you still need life insurance. So they had a mortgage on the house. They were mid-renovation, and the renovations were terrible. We had to rip them out, but that's another story. But so they were mid-renovation, so the house didn't show well. The husband died, and then she got a second mortgage, very expensive interest second mortgage, and thinking that she would be able to fix up the house and get it sold, except I don't think she was really thinking about how she would pay off these two mortgages, one being very high interest. So suddenly she realized, I'm stuck and I'm going to lose my house. And when you go into foreclosure, you can't buy another house until that foreclosure drops off your credit report in 7 years.
Yeah.
So going into foreclosure is a terrible thing for people if you ever want to buy another house again. So this lady was really stuck. She couldn't pay her mortgage. She couldn't sell her house because it was ugly. And she just knew she was stuck. So what we did was there wasn't really much equity. There was a little bit that she got. Actually, we paid it out at the front. So we paid her $5,000 up front so that she could get started in her new life. And that was most of her equity, really. There was only a couple thousand left at the back end when we cashed her out. But the other thing that we did was we closed right away so that we would be making all the payments, and we let her rent it from us for 2 months while she found a new place.
Great.
So that's the Canadian version. Yes,
that's the Canadian. That's the Sherilynn version. Where you're helping people. You're not gouging them and saying, "Oh, goody." Yeah. That just revolts me.
Oh yeah, no, totally. And so she saved her credit. She saved herself from foreclosure. She had no more stress because she knew that this was done and gone. And yet she had the money that she could hire movers and pay her security deposit and rent on her new place. And it was just a load off her back.
Yeah.
And it worked out beautifully. And that's what I loved. And then we took the house, totally renovated it, and sold it to a lovely young family. And it just, it's one of my favorite deals.
But where did you had to have spent money on renovations though? So if you didn't spend any money buying it, how did you not?
Yeah, well, see, that's another beautiful thing about buying with. So in this case, like I said, we did pay $5,000 up front as a down payment because she needed some cash. Mm-hmm. So we did pay $5,000 down. Whoop-de-doo, we paid $5,000 down on a $300,000 house. It's pennies, really. But then that left us, instead of putting $60,000 down on a house, buying it conventionally, we put $5,000. That left $55,000 sitting in my bank so that I could do the renovations. So it works beautifully if you're talking about doing a fix and flip or a fix and refinance, because now remember, this particular property had that expensive second mortgage. So we didn't want to keep that going. We wanted to fix it up and either sell it or refinance it and do a rent to own or do something. But we couldn't keep that expensive financing long term. That was a little special one with this. But because we bought with almost nothing down, we had the money to do the renovation and then turn around and do that lovely refinance or sale. And instead of putting $60,000 up front, or even worse, expensive bridge financing, which is huge interest rates. Mm-hmm. So and then you still have some down payment plus your renovation costs. So this is a much cheaper way with no mortgage qualification to do a fix and flip or a fix and refinance.
Great. Okay, excellent. Okay, so you said the sellers come to you,
Mm-hmm.
and then the buyers, how do you find them?
Well, with buyers, that's the easy part. You once you have the house all ready to go, then you just either list it with a realtor or put it on as a rent to own or for rent on all the Facebook groups and all the faster rent to own section and whatever. And what I will often do is I'll put it. I might list it with my realtor and let her know that this is for rent or rent to own or sale. But the thing is, I can do that with her because I give her so much business, either through myself or through referrals, and this is something really important. Just because you can buy with zero down doesn't mean that you should. If the numbers don't work, then you don't want to buy that. And if the property doesn't fit your system, doesn't fit your typical rental property portfolio, you also probably don't want to buy that. For instance, I've had people want me to buy their luxury executive homes. No, even if I could get it for zero down, what the heck am I going to do with it? So I don't take those. So those I refer to my realtor. So then, because she's getting so much business from me, then she doesn't mind when I say, okay, well, I want to list it with you, but if I happen to find a rent to own tenant, I'm pulling the listing and we're going with rent to own. So
Okay.
yeah, she's okay with that. And when you do a lot of referrals, then they don't mind.
Okay.
Or-
One
And
thing
my
I'd like,
Go ahead.
if I could just throw something in, we've always told people too that when you're trying to work out if the numbers work or not, you have to be harshly honest. You can't blow sunshine up your butt, because if you underestimate your cost of maintenance or anything else, you're going to burn. So you got to be really honest and really aggressive and conservative in your estimates of how much you're going to make, rather than fall in love with a property.
Oh, absolutely. Oh God, no, you never, you don't, I didn't even buy my own personal residence just based on falling in love with it. The numbers still had to work.
Good for you.
But I'm just wired that way. But and you're so right. And when you're looking at running the numbers and making sure they work, now, of course, I do rent to own, and that's my preference for these, which brings in more money every month because you're getting the rent plus you're getting a little bit towards the future down payment. So that means instead of getting $2,000 a month in monthly payments, you might be getting $2,500. But when you're running the numbers, I like to run the numbers based on if it's only a regular rental and I'm only getting the $2,000 a month, is this going to work? And what happens if I'm wrong on that rent and I can only get $1,800 a month? Is it still going to work? So yeah, you want to always run with the worst case scenario. And well, I like to say have plans A, B, C, and Z, because you want to run with that worst case scenario and then also look at what's possible, what your potential upside is going to be. But when you're running those numbers, you're looking at worst case.
Okay, good. By the way, luxury rentals, when we rented properties, those ones went pretty fast. Oddly enough, for us, they did.
Yeah, it really depends where you are. And it also depends, because if you specialize in that, you probably would have no problem with that. But I don't.
Yeah.
So I don't specialize in luxury rentals or executive rentals. I don't know that market, so I don't want that house. And that's a really key point too, actually, is you need to know your local market and you need to know your specialty.
Yes.
And I like to say buy plain vanilla. So when I'm looking at a property and whether I want that into my portfolio, then it's got to be, as I say, plain vanilla, which means that there's nothing weird about it. It's kind of your typical couple steps up from a starter home property. And that has the most appeal to the most people. That's why it's plain vanilla.
Agreed.
And that's where you're going to have the most options, because if you have a plain vanilla typical house that's in good shape in a decent area, you'll always be able to rent it. And you probably will be able to rent to own it. So, and you'll definitely be able to sell it at some point. So it just has all your options open for you.
Great. Yeah, it's funny that the luxury ones went pretty fast to people who were either getting divorced and wanted to stay in the same neighborhood as their spouse because they had dual custody of the kids, or oddly enough, drug addicts, drug dealers. I mean, not drug addicts. You get these guys driving up with the designer sunglasses with the signatures on them, and the posse. They always brought a bunch of guys with them. Dogs. They always had dogs. As soon as they drive up, I'd be like, oh, geez, here we go. But anyway, that's not the norm. That was just that particular market that always astounded me. We got the two types: the people that could afford it, and then the people who wanted to afford it and wanted to pay cash, who were just probably not the kinds of clients you wanted to have.
It was funny when you'd ask their sort of what their annual income was, and it would be like $20,000, and they're driving a BMW, and you're thinking, something doesn't add up there.
Yeah. I think we've all got our share of people like that. We've had when I was just looking for a rent-to-own client one time, and this lady, very nice lady, called up, and she was an exotic dancer, and she wanted to do rent-to-own because her income was $150,000, but her verifiable income was $24,000.
Exactly.
Well, something's got to give here. You can't. You're not going to ever get a bank mortgage until you claim that on taxes. And once you claim it on taxes once, you can't just decide, oh no, now I'm back to 20,000. So yeah, and that being said, I mean, we're all about win-win. We also prefer to deal with people who only work with that minimum level of integrity. So yeah, if somebody's going to cheat on their taxes, that's not the type of person that I want to have a business relationship with.
No, you don't. Because we've had a number of people who kind of, I call them flying under the radar. Like they had a business, they were claiming GST, but they didn't actually pay it. They hadn't filed their income tax, and they couldn't show me verifiable income. But again, they drove fancy cars and all the other stuff. And I remember telling one of the guys, you are never going to be able to go mainstream and rent a regular house or even buy a house if you keep doing that, because people want to see what the upfront income that you're making. They don't want to have to guess, and they're not going to take your word for it by you giving them a bunch of invoices or receipts. That's not going to cut it. So I said, you think you might be getting ahead now, but you're actually not. You're shooting yourself in the foot. And I said, by the way, the government, if you think CRA is not going to go after you, the question is not if they will go after you, it's when they go after you. And when they do, they will be vicious if you haven't filed your income tax in a number of years. They will just get you. So I would hand out names of accountants. I'd be like, please contact my accountant or get a referral to someone he would recommend, because you have to file your income tax, because they'll go after you and it's going to be really ugly for you. So it was really strange that people could be in their 40s and still be, couch surfing or trying to fly under the radar and not claim stuff, thinking they could get away with it. It doesn't work that way.
Well, and that's one of the things you said was it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. I mean, that's how we've always operated as real estate investors, because real estate investment is one of those industries where there's so much I don't want to say gray area. That's because that implies something negative. But just for instance, whether it's an expense or whether it's a capital cost deduction, there are so many things that it's kind of, oh, is it this or is it this? And there are a lot of honest mistakes that can be made. And then there are people who, just blow that out of the water and do terrible stuff. But because of the people who do terrible stuff, we're always facing the possibility of an audit. So why would you ever not be 100% above board all the time? And if you make an honest mistake, that's easily forgiven. And then it's just, oh, well, you'll just have to pay a bit of interest on that. But, it's not ever going to be a big deal if it's just an honest mistake. So again, we only want to work with people with high integrity and who are completely above board. And again, we only want to create win-win and help people out and be solution providers.
Excellent. So I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to turn the next set of questions over to Gil. So what happens if you get a tenant buyer in your rent-to-own property and something major happens, like a water pipe bursts, furnace shuts down, and you have to get a new furnace? Who pays for that? How do you deal with that?
Well, it depends on which province you're in, and it depends on how your contracts are drafted. So I say it depends on which province because, for instance, in Ontario, and I don't know if you have any viewers in Ontario, but in Ontario, their leases are very strict as to how they can be worded. But in Alberta, for example, we can say that this, and this are the responsibility of the tenant to repair. Now, one thing that is the same everywhere is contract law. So the option agreement, the option to purchase, that contract falls under contract law. It has nothing to do with the Residential Tenancies Act. So you can have it worded in there to say, yes, of course, as per the Residential Tenancies Act, we will pay for any major repairs, but then that will in turn be added to the price of the property at the end. So that's one way to do it if you're in a place that, or even you could do that in any province, do it that way. So you're covering the repairs and then it gets added on. But in Alberta, because we can have it that tenants can be responsible for certain repairs, then we have it written in there that they are responsible, and it's always worked out just fine. That being said, if something happened right away at the start of a rent to own, then we would, and we have done this where we negotiate and share the burden, because it's neither of us knew that we were getting into that. It didn't show up on the inspection report. You know, it's let's share this burden and we'll figure it out.
Good stuff. So Gil?
Does the, just further to that, is it ever the responsibility of the person who's on title to do those repairs, or does that fall on you? Or like if it's not on the tenant, is it on you?
When we're buying a property with agreement for sale, so even though we're not on title, we are 100% responsible for everything to do with that property. So and we even switch the insurance into our names, which you need a broker who is awesome in order to be able to do that, because you're not on title. So it has to be a specially worded policy to have the insurance in your name. But that's a little more detail than we need to get into. But yeah, when we buy a property with agreement for sale, so the seller is still on the mortgage, the seller is still on title, which means the seller actually has legal ownership because he's on title. But we have beneficial ownership, and we have 100% responsibility for everything. So taxes, repairs, if the tenant trashes the place, that's on us. If the furnace blows, if there's a flood, that's all us. That's one of the benefits for the seller, is that yes, they just get to wash their hands of this place, and sure, they're still a mortgage and title, but they are not responsible for it anymore.
Interesting. So you've got a tenant, a tenant slash, what do they call it?
Buyer?
Rent to own, and they like the place, and they say they'd like to decorate, renovate, paint. Is that something that has to be stipulated in a contract as well?
It's a good idea to have that written in the contract for sure as to what's allowed. Like, for instance, you might allow them to paint without any consultation, but I prefer to have it as just, it's basically how a standard lease works, that any alterations have to be approved. So that's how it's worded in the lease. And then they just give us a heads up. So they might email and say, hey, we were thinking of replacing the carpet with hardwood. Okay, go for it. As long as you've got somebody who is qualified doing it for you. Because when they're in a situation like that, they can even do it themselves if they're qualified, experienced, or have somebody qualified and experienced working with them. So yeah, they can do those sorts of things. And now, of course, if it's plumbing, electrical, gas, all of those need a proper licensed tradesperson to work with, of course.
Yes.
Oh, and anything requiring permits, they have to get, because we are the person we're not on title, but we are the owner with power of attorney to give us the ability, even though we're not on title, we've got that power of attorney so that we can apply for permits. So if, for instance, you've got somebody in there who wants to finish a basement, well, that's going to require permits. So then we have a power of attorney giving us control that we can go and get those permits for them or authorize it.
Okay.
Interesting. And if they decide they want to sublease, I assume that's in the tenancy agreement as well?
The way that my lease is worded, and my lease is very strict. The way that my lease is worded is that there's only certain people allowed in the property in it. So it's, the family of 4 in addition to any additions to their family. So our lease doesn't allow for subletting or anything like that. But if let's say though you have a rent to own tenant and they finish the basement with a suite, well, of course we're going to allow that. So, but it's not something that is automatically granted. That's, again, something that needs to be discussed.
Okay. Does your course include the forms that you would need to do these kinds of transactions?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, when we, so what's coming up on the 28th is a free masterclass that gives the rundown of how to do a seller finance purchase, no money down, no mortgage qualification purchase. So that's a free masterclass. We do have a course that we also offer, and that includes that's very detailed instruction. That's if you want me to hold your hand through this whole process and walk you through absolutely everything you will ever need to know and give you all the contracts and everything and consult with you, then you take my course. If you just want to learn how to do it and get the gist of it and see, oh yeah, that's something I want to do, I'm going to run with this now, you can just take the masterclass that's on the February 28th, and that'll give you loads of information to see if you even want to do this. It'll give you enough information that you could probably even just do it yourself, if you have the contracts. But yeah, the masterclass gives you lots of information to get you started. And then, as I say, if you really want the hand holding and absolutely everything you ever need to know, then you can take my course.
And I presume obviously any real estate transaction requires a lawyer. Do you need a lawyer who specializes in this sort of transaction?
Absolutely. And, my lawyer, he retired, darn him. I had the most
selfish.
I know, how selfish.
How can you do that?
he was so amazing. And actually his entire firm was amazing. Everybody there was amazing. And he retired and they all went off. Well, actually both the main lawyers retired and then everybody else kind of spread to the wind. And it took me a couple of years before I found another lawyer who really got it, who I didn't have to explain anything to. Because if you need to explain parts of this to your lawyer, you've got the wrong lawyer.
So do you refer people to your lawyer, or do they have to find them on their own?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, my lawyer, he's based in Edmonton, but of course he can help people out right across Alberta. Then I do have connections to lawyers in other provinces as well who are well versed in this, because you absolutely want somebody who knows the intricacies of this and knows how to write it up and because it is a little bit different. And the bigger thing comes if you are ever refinancing like we did on that one, then that's a little bit trickier. And then also when you're selling to the third party eventually, like a rent to own tenant, then it's a bit of a different transaction than a normal real estate sale. So yeah, you need somebody who specializes in this. But as I say, we refer people to our lawyer, and I have a few other lawyers within Alberta that I've worked with before that I know this stuff cold, which is important because you also want to have a lawyer to refer the seller to, because when the seller is going through all these contracts, they should have independent legal counsel to make sure they understand what's all the intricacies of it as well. So you want to have your own lawyer and then also another lawyer familiar with seller finance purchases for your seller to work with.
So I'm just going to jump in and ask a question, but what if somebody wants to sell their own property with seller financing? Does your course work for them?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, we've actually sold a few properties with seller financing to our tenant buyers. In each case, it was like, for instance, in one case, it was a self-employed person who knew when he started the rent to own, he knew it might be tricky for him to have the verifiable income, because with small business, of course, as real estate investors, we know this, your deductions can take away a lot from your verifiable income. So your actual income might be, let's say, $100,000, but after all your deductions and depreciation is taken off, same with truckers and a lot of other people with big equipment, once all those deductions are taken off, now your income is showing us $50,000. So you do make the right amount of money, but it really depends on how your taxes are done. And both ways are legal, but the thing is, you need to have a couple of years without taking those deductions and just pay the tax on your full income in order to have that verifiable income. So in his case, he knew that, oh, it's going to be tricky for us to plan all these deductions, but he also knew that he would have the full 20% down, because I won't sell on agreement for sale with zero down. I want close to 20% when I'm in the selling position. But yeah, I've sold with seller financing to a couple of different rent-to-own tenants who had all the 20% down, but because they were self-employed, they were still having trouble getting a mortgage. So then they were just paying a couple percent above our interest rate, which was still way better than if they had gone to second tier financing. Because if they were in second tier financing, they would have been paying 8%. And with us, they were paying 4%. And I think our interest rate was 2%. So they were still saving loads of money. They got to buy the house officially. And yeah, again, win-win.
Great.
I'm going to. This question is not entirely in the list of questions, but the question that we have is, how much are lawyer fees in rent to own? But I want to add to that: if they do your course and get the contracts that you've done, does that save on legal fees, or can that save on legal fees if you've got the contracts already started?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Now the contracts that I work with, I took a template from a lawyer. So they started out as a basic template from a lawyer, and then I added all of my years of experience and learning from mistakes and everything else into these contracts to really, and actually not only that, but also to make it more clear to the seller and more transparent. So for instance, on my purchase agreement, it outlines a few terms that will later come in the agreement for sale, which is kind of like the mortgage document. You know, when you buy a property, you have your standard purchase agreement, and then when you go to the lawyer, you sign that great big 30, 40, 50 page mortgage document. Well, it's similar with this, except it's the purchase agreement and then the seller financing document. Well, I want to make sure that in that purchase agreement, it outlines all of the stuff, because I've been surprised by mortgage documents before and this was from a bank, where they had some terms in the mortgage agreement, the mortgage document, that weren't in the commitment letter that they initially sent us. So we're sitting there on closing day signing, and it's just, wait a minute, what is this? What are you talking about? Where did this term come from? So we don't want any surprises like that for our sellers. So we make it sure that it's really clear and really transparent. And that's a vast improvement on any other contracts that I've seen from anybody else who does this sort of deal. I haven't seen anybody who does it the same way. And yeah, if you were to go into a lawyer's office, you're going to get that basic template without any of this awesomeness in it.
Better to have the awesomeness. How long is your course?
The course is, I think it's 5 weeks. It might be 6 now. I can't remember for sure, but let's say 5 just to be safe. But yeah, I would say to people, take the master class, the free master class on the 28th, and then see what you think. If you think this might be something that you want to try, and then you want more information, so you'll get more information. You'll get information in that master class on how to do the seller finance purchases. Then you can decide, hey, yeah, I really want to pursue this. I want professional help to walk me through it. I want all the contracts, which, well, I mean, really, and I've had people say this to me lots before, that the price of the course is less than what they would pay to go and get the contracts done.
A lawyer, yeah.
So,
well, how much? Do you mind if I ask how much your course is?
no, you have to wait until February 28th. Attend the master
I
class.
am going to mention that I have talked to lawyers about this because I want to sell one of my properties with owner financing, and lawyer fees are $400 to $500 an hour.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So
So
just imagine a few hours of lawyer fees explaining something to you or creating documents for you, and they charge you for everything: paper clips, phone calls, photocopying, your time photocopy. That can add up really fast. So like $2,000 for lawyer fees, chump change for them.
Oh yeah.
And if you already have a contract that's been tested in the market the way yours have, I mean, if you go to a lawyer, they may not catch all the details that you've already proven out. So
yeah,
for
I've
sure.
dealt with all kinds of lawyers. I worked at Keanu College as a program director for many years, and I hired many lawyers to teach courses that I ran. And you have some people who are like top of their class, very articulate, very intelligent, very ethical. And then you have the other people who are, if they weren't lawyers, they'd probably be behind bars. Probably became lawyers so they wouldn't end up behind bars. But with the Boodles, there was a big difference between the people that just because a person's a lawyer doesn't mean they're not going to make mistakes. Doesn't mean they're going to have your best interests in mind. So.
Oh, for sure. But an even bigger difference and an important point is that lawyers have the legal expertise. They don't have the operational experience. So if you've got a lawyer who's trying to work with you on something like this, and they have no operational experience, they've never actually done one of these, they've never seen it through from start to finish, of course their contracts can't reflect operational experience. All they can reflect are the basic legal terms that are required to make it binding.
So what do you do if you have tenant problems while the tenant buyer is in the property?
Well, I have a really big dog, and I say, sick him. No, I don't.
I believe that's section 5 of the RTA that covers that.
Yeah, big dogs. The big dog section of the RTA.
Yeah, the big thing when you're dealing with rent to own is you're going after a higher quality tenant. So we have had virtually no issues in all the years, and goodness, it's been a lot of years, since 2009, I believe, was our first rent to own. So it's been a lot of rent to own tenants that we've dealt with. And even in the rare case where somebody needs to walk away, like we had a couple people in the oil slump, they were both high up engineers in the oil field, both lost their jobs, and they had to walk away from the property. So they were getting nothing back because they were starting to get a bit in arrears in rent. So they were getting nothing back from their option payments. So they were walking away, not getting any money back, and they still cleaned that place better than anybody I've ever seen clean a rental before.
Oh, wow.
So you're getting higher quality people, and there are rarely issues when you're dealing with rent to own if you are qualifying people really well, of course.
Yes, and then my last question, I think you've answered already. If people get stuck, where can they go for help? Because I've taken a number of courses. I even took one of these courses through RAIN. I was you were a speaker in one of the RAIN classes, and I called you for help, and you were making pierogi, and you interrupted your pierogi making to help me, which was very nice of you. But overall, I find that's usually the section that people need help with when they take a course. It's like you can read the information, but when you're dealing with human beings, especially legal stuff. I get very nervous dealing with legal stuff and big numbers because, you know, how many hits can you take, you know?
Yeah.
So you want to know that there's somebody there that you can rely on. So what kind of support do you offer your students?
Oh, for sure. Well, when people take my course, then they automatically get a couple hours of well, I mean, in addition to all the one on a few classes, because we keep the class sizes really small, so it can be really interactive. So in addition to that, then they also get consultation time one-on-one with me, and even if somebody has used up all their official consultation time and they still need help, I'm going to help them. I actually had a guy call. He took one of my rent-to-own courses, I think 2 years ago, and he emailed me just a couple of weeks ago asking for help on a potential deal he was doing. And so, well, I walked him through it, because why wouldn't I? So yeah, once people are my official students, then I like to take care of them. So
well, that's very nice. That's good to hear. So your masterclass is February the 28th. At what time?
it's at 7 p.m. Mountain.
7 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. The 28th, which is what day of the week is
2
that?
weeks. Happy Valentine's Day, by the way.
Oh
Same
my
to you.
goodness.
Yeah, it's a
Happy
Tuesday
Valentine's.
night. So it's
Yeah.
going to be a Tuesday night at 7 p.m.
Yep.
Mountain
And
Standard Time.
that's Alberta.
Alberta time, yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to include the link on my Facebook Live tomorrow after I publish this YouTube video, and I'll also publish my affiliate link so that if you decide that you want to take the course and want to go and get Sherry's hand holding, which I strongly recommend, because anytime through the first time through anything, you need some hand holding. You really do.
Well,
Especially if I can say that, like, when you're getting into this kind of business, a mistake is going to cost you a lot.
Yeah.
Oh God, yes. Yeah. Well, and you know, the funny thing is, my first big mistake didn't cost me anything. It lost me, because I walked in with the totally wrong documents, and I set them down in front of the seller, who was just losing his mind, needing to get out of this house. He was getting a job overseas. He had a whole lot of stress in his life. He wanted it gone. He was willing to walk away from $70,000 in equity just to get this gone so he could move on with his life. And I walked in with all the wrong documents, and I confused the heck out of him, because I mean, I had taken one of those American courses where they're just, you know, get this and do this, and then screw everybody. So I walked in with that knowledge and ended up confusing this poor guy, and he ended up so confused and not doing the deal. He ended up losing his house instead of selling it to me.
Oh,
and
no.
I lost $70,000 in free equity.
boy.
So that was a pretty expensive mistake.
Yeah.
So it's way better to have, because that, like I say, that course that I took, it was just a wham bam thank you ma'am kind of course, not any kind of personal attention or walking you through or hand holding or consultation or anything. And it was just, yeah, you're done the course, get out. So that's definitely not what I'm about. I want people to succeed. I want to create those win-win situations for the buyer, the seller, the tenant buyer, if there is one, everybody. But as far as that link goes, so that link is what you need to register for the free training class. And then in the free training class, then I'll tell you about the course at the end of that class if you want to go further with me. So yeah, so people will learn all about what they need for the basics of agreement for sale and seller finance and zero down purchases. And then if they think, oh yeah, this sounds awesome, I want to know more, then I'll tell them how to join the actual course and get the hand.
Gotcha. Because I was getting confused about the affiliate link there. They're all different. I've got several affiliate links I have on my website, and they all have their own protocol. So yes, it's good to know what this one does. So I'll definitely include that one in for the master class. And it's nice to hear. It's heartwarming to hear that you want to do win-win, Sherry. That's the way that you think. And that's why you've been on my show a couple times, because I only want people here who are there to help and support landlords. It's hard enough to be in this business. We need to be there for each other, which Sherilynn definitely is. And Gil is too. I was going to mention something, but I totally forgot what I was going to say about. Oh, Gil calls, yes. You said you lost a deal. Gil calls that learning tuition.
Yes. Well, I would rather that and if I had my course available to me when I first started, oh man, that would have been so awesome, because I wouldn't have lost the $70,000 deal. And well, I mean, goodness, $70,000 in free equity is a whole other down payment on another house.
Another property, yes.
Like, yeah. So it still bugs me. I'm still bitter about losing that. But so it's one of those things where yeah, you can pay a little bit for some awesome education and have your own $70,000 free equity deal that you don't screw up.
Yeah,
we tell people learn from our mistakes, so that so you don't have to make them yourselves. That's
yes. And to that end, I have to always do a little bit of shameless advertising. If you're wondering, if you already have a rental property and you want to know what to do with it, or you're thinking about getting a rental property, get the Canadian Landlord's Handbook. I'm getting some really good reviews, by the way.
Awesome.
And people are emailing me and telling me, oh, I just bought my first rental property and I couldn't have done it without your book. I so love to hear that. It's such an ego booster. Does my ego no harm. Okay, but that's... Okay, February the 28th is going to be the masterclass. I will post the link. I'll send it out on emails to those of you who are on my list, those lucky few of you with special place in heaven who are on my list. Thank you very much, Sherilynn, for joining us tonight and sharing this really good investment strategy. It's really nice to know that there are other ways of investing besides banks, and it's nice to know that someone who is kind and ethical and fair like Sherilynn is going to walk you through the process. So thank you, Sherilynn. And thank you, Gil, for joining us from BC.
Thank you so much for having me, and just a little shout out to you. It's nice to have somebody also with high ethical standards who is trying to help people do even just basic landlording, because that is so important, especially when you look at all the crap information that people get from Facebook, which is not the best place to learn. So to have something like the Canadian Landlord's Handbook, where it's a really good, solid resource. I love that. So kudos to you for doing that.
Thank you. And that's why there's a special place in heaven for you, Sherilynn. Anyway, happy Valentine's Day to both of you. Thank you so much for being on the show. And we will post this tomorrow morning. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you.
Bye.